I thought the worst betrayal would come from a stranger. I was wrong. The deepest cut came from my own daughter when I saw her TikTok video with 50,000 likes that said, "When your mom becomes the family burden, and you have to adult for everyone." My name is Hattie Williams, and I'm about to tell you how my daughter's public humiliation became the catalyst for the most empowering decision of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You know that feeling when your world shifts so violently that you question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you? That moment when love turns to bewilderment, then to something much more dangerous? That's exactly what happened to me at 11:32 on a Wednesday morning in October, while I was folding laundry in my small apartment above the flower shop I'd been running for 15 years. I was sorting through a basket of towels when my phone buzzed with a notification from my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who lived in the unit next door. She'd sent me a link with crying face emojis and a message that simply read, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry you had to see this." My hands trembled as I clicked the link, not understanding what could possibly warrant such a reaction. The video that loaded on my screen made my legs give out completely. There was my daughter, Sophia, sitting in what I immediately recognized as the living room of the house I'd been helping her pay for, speaking directly to her phone camera with the kind of confident energy she usually reserved for her marketing job presentations. Her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the bay windows I'd helped her pick out when she first bought the place 3 years ago. "Let's talk about something nobody wants to discuss," Sophia began, her voice carrying that influencer tone she'd perfected over the past year of building her social media presence. "What do you do when your mom becomes the family burden, and you have to adult for everyone? Like, I love my mom, but she's 58 and still acting like she's 25, making impulsive decisions and expecting me to clean up the mess." I watched in stunned silence as my daughter, the child I'd raised as a single mother after her father abandoned us when she was 6, proceeded to detail what she called my financial irresponsibility and emotional neediness to thousands of strangers on the internet. She spoke about my flower shop with dismissive laughter, calling it a cute hobby that doesn't pay the bills, and describing how she'd been forced to help me with rent and utilities because I refused to get a real job. "The hardest part," Sophia continued, looking directly into the camera with practiced vulnerability, "is watching your parent become the child in the relationship. My mom calls me multiple times a day asking for advice about everything from what to cook for dinner to whether she should date this guy she met at the grocery store. It's like having a teenager, except teenagers eventually grow up." The comments section was already flooded with responses. Heart emojis from people praising Sophia for her honesty and maturity. Sympathetic messages about dealing with difficult parents. Advice about setting boundaries with toxic family members. And sprinkled throughout, enough identifying details that anyone who knew us would recognize exactly who she was talking about. I sat on my bedroom floor, still clutching a half-folded towel, feeling like I was watching my life be dissected by a stranger. This was my daughter, the girl I'd worked 3 jobs to put through college, whose student loans I was still helping to pay off, whose house down payment had come partially from my retirement savings. The daughter who called me every morning on her way to work, not because I was needy, but because she said it helped her start her day with positivity. The video had been posted 6 hours earlier and already had over 50,000 views, 8,000 likes, and hundreds of comments. My phone started buzzing with messages from friends and acquaintances who had seen it, their texts ranging from concerned to outraged to awkwardly sympathetic. My sister Janet texted, "What the hell is wrong with Sophia?" followed by a string of angry emojis. My longtime customer, Mrs. Rodriguez, sent a heart emoji with "thinking of you." My book club friend Linda wrote, "I can't believe she aired your business like that." But what hurt most wasn't the public humiliation, though that cut deep enough. It was the realization that this was how my daughter truly saw me. Not as the woman who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities I never had, but as a burden she had to endure. Not as the mother who had cheered at every school play and graduation, but as an embarrassing obligation she resented having to manage. I replayed every interaction we'd had over the past few months, searching for signs I'd missed. Had I really been calling too much? Was my flower shop truly just a hobby in her eyes? When I'd asked her opinion about Robert, the kind widower I'd been having coffee with, was that really inappropriate neediness? Or was it what I thought it was? A daughter sharing in her mother's tentative steps toward happiness after years of being alone? The towel in my hands was damp from tears I hadn't realized I was crying. My small apartment, which had always felt cozy and sufficient, suddenly seemed shabby and pathetic. The flower shop below, my pride and joy for 15 years, felt diminished by Sophia's casual dismissal. Even my carefully maintained independence, something I'd worked so hard to achieve after her father left, seemed like an illusion if my own daughter saw me as a dependent burden. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a viral video or public embarrassment. This was about the fundamental dishonesty that had apparently been poisoning our relationship for months, maybe years. While I thought we were close, sharing our lives and supporting each other as adult women, Sophia had been building resentment and judgment that she was now comfortable sharing with the entire internet. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Sophia herself, sent just minutes after I'd watched her video. "Hey Mom, can you help me with the mortgage payment this month? The freelance project I was counting on fell through and I'm a little short. Love you." The casual nature of her request, sent so soon after publicly calling me a burden, made something crack inside my chest. For 3 years, I'd been helping Sophia with her mortgage payments whenever she asked, dipping into my savings and sometimes skipping my own bills to make sure she could keep the house she was so proud of. I'd told myself it was an investment in her future, a way to help her build equity and stability that I'd never been able to achieve at her age. Now I understood that my help wasn't seen as love or sacrifice. It was expected, taken for granted, something she felt entitled to even while publicly mocking my financial situation. The daughter who had just told thousands of people that I made irresponsible decisions and couldn't manage my own life was simultaneously asking me to manage hers. I set my phone aside without responding and finished folding the laundry with mechanical precision. Each towel and sheet represented the simple, honest life I'd built for myself. No, it wasn't glamorous or financially abundant, but it was mine. I'd earned every piece of furniture, paid every bill, made every decision without depending on anyone else. The flower shop might not make me rich, but it brought joy to people's lives and provided enough income for my needs when I wasn't constantly supplementing my daughter's lifestyle. As the afternoon light faded and the flower shop below prepared to close, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. I was done being my daughter's safety net while simultaneously being her public embarrassment. If Sophia wanted to present herself as the responsible adult dealing with her burdensome mother, then she was about to discover what real adult responsibility looked like. The investigation I was about to begin would reveal layers of deception I never could have imagined. And by the time I was finished, Sophia would learn that the mother she'd dismissed as a burden was actually the backbone that had been holding her entire life together. Before I tell you about the shocking discoveries that changed everything, I need you to understand what I thought I had with my daughter. Because you can't truly grasp the depth of betrayal without first knowing the beauty of what I believed was real, and the sacrifices I'd made to build the life she was now mocking on social media. Sophia came into this world during one of the darkest periods of my life. I was 23, married to a man who talked big about family and responsibility but disappeared the moment parenthood became real, rather than theoretical. When Sophia was 6 months old, her father announced he'd met someone else and walked out, leaving behind nothing but empty promises and a stack of unpaid bills. Suddenly, I was a single mother with no college degree, no career prospects, and a baby who depended on me for everything. Those early years were a blur of minimum wage jobs, night classes, and constant worry about whether I was doing enough, providing enough, being enough for the little girl who looked at me like I hung the moon. I worked as a grocery store cashier during the day while Sophia was at daycare, then cleaned office buildings at night after she went to sleep, leaving her with my elderly neighbor, who charged me almost nothing because she understood what it meant to struggle. On weekends, I took her with me to my part-time job at a local florist, where she would sit quietly in the corner coloring, while I learned the trade that would eventually become my salvation.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Sophia was my motivation for everything. When she started school and came home talking about the other kids' birthday parties and toys, I picked up a third job to make sure she never felt left out. When she expressed interest in dance classes, I gave up buying myself new clothes for a year to pay for lessons and recitals. When she needed help with homework, I struggled through subjects I'd never learned properly myself, both of us figuring out fractions and reading comprehension together at our small kitchen table. The florist job became my passion, and eventually my escape route from financial instability. Mrs. Martinez, the owner, became my mentor and surrogate mother, teaching me not just about flowers but about running a business with integrity and heart. When she decided to retire, she offered to sell me the shop at a price I could afford with a payment plan that stretched my resources but gave me hope for real independence. Sophia was 12 when I bought the flower shop, old enough to understand that this represented a new chapter for both of us. She seemed proud when I showed her the lease agreement and the business plan I'd written by hand in a spiral notebook. "You're really going to be your own boss?" she asked, her eyes wide with what I interpreted as admiration. "That's so cool, Mom. The flower shop years were the happiest of my life." Sophia would come by after school, doing homework in the back room while I arranged bouquets and helped customers plan weddings and celebrations. She learned to make simple arrangements herself, her small fingers surprisingly deft at creating beauty from stems and petals. We were a team, building something together that felt permanent and meaningful. When Sophia graduated high school with honors, I cried harder than she did. This brilliant, confident young woman was heading to college on a partial scholarship, something that had seemed impossible when she was a baby, and I was barely keeping us fed. I'd done it. Despite every obstacle and moment of doubt, I'd raised a daughter who was going to have opportunities I'd never dreamed of. College was expensive, even with her scholarship, but I made it work by taking out a second mortgage on the small house I'd finally been able to buy. Sophia's dorm room was nicer than any place I'd lived until I was 30, and watching her thrive in that environment felt like the greatest victory of my life. She called me every few days, sharing stories about her classes and friends, asking for advice about everything from boy troubles to career decisions. When she graduated with a degree in marketing and communications, I was there in the front row wearing a dress I'd saved for 6 months to buy, bursting with pride as my daughter walked across that stage. She'd done it. We'd done it. Against all odds, the little girl whose father had abandoned her was now a college graduate with a bright future ahead of her. Sophia's early career was everything I'd hoped for her. She landed a good job at a marketing firm, moved into a nice apartment, and started building the kind of independent adult life I'd always dreamed she would have. When she called to tell me she was looking at houses, I was thrilled. Home ownership at 25 was something I hadn't achieved until I was 38, and it represented the security and stability I'd worked so hard to give her. The house she found was beautiful but expensive, stretching her budget even with her good salary. When she asked if I could help with the down payment, I didn't hesitate. My retirement savings weren't substantial, but helping my daughter buy her first home felt like the best possible investment. "I'll pay you back," she promised, and I waved away her concern. "It's not a loan, sweetie. It's a gift. You've worked so hard for this." The monthly mortgage payments proved more challenging than Sophia had anticipated, especially when her industry experienced some instability and freelance work became less predictable. When she first asked for help with a payment, she was apologetic and embarrassed, promising it was just temporary until things picked up. I was happy to help, remembering all the times people had helped me when Sophia was small and I was struggling. What I thought was temporary assistance became a regular pattern, but I didn't mind. Sophia was building equity, creating the foundation for her future financial security. My flower shop wasn't making me wealthy, but it provided enough income to live comfortably and help my daughter when needed. This felt like what family was supposed to be, supporting each other through difficult times. Our relationship during this period felt closer than ever. Sophia called me every morning during her commute, sharing office gossip and asking my advice about work situations. She visited the flower shop regularly, sometimes helping with arrangements when I had big orders. We went to lunch together every Sunday, a tradition that started when she bought the house and lived close enough to make it convenient. When I mentioned that I'd met Robert at the grocery store and we'd started having coffee together, Sophia seemed genuinely happy for me. "It's about time you started dating again," she said. "You deserve someone nice in your life." She even offered to meet him, saying she wanted to make sure he was good enough for her mom. Her protective attitude felt loving and appropriate, not burdensome or inappropriate, as she would later characterize it. The woman sitting on her bedroom floor watching her daughter mock her on social media was the same woman who had sacrificed everything to ensure that daughter had opportunities and security. The flower shop Sophia dismissed as a hobby had paid for her college textbooks, her graduation dress, her security deposit, and countless other expenses over the years. The phone calls she characterized as needy were conversations she had initiated half the time, treating me as her confidant and advisor. I had thought we were building something beautiful together, a mother-daughter relationship based on mutual respect and support. I believed Sophia saw my sacrifices and appreciated them, that she understood the love behind every dollar I'd given her and every worry I'd shared. I thought she was proud of the life I'd built from nothing, the business I'd created with my own hands, the independence I'd fought so hard to achieve. Instead, she saw me as a burden, someone whose love came with obligations she resented. A mother whose pride in her daughter's accomplishments was somehow embarrassing and excessive. The woman who had moved mountains to give her daughter a better life was now being publicly mocked for not being better herself. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that my real story was just beginning. The investigation I was about to undertake would reveal that the daughter I'd raised with such care and sacrifice had learned some very different lessons than the ones I thought I'd been teaching. And by the time I was finished, both of us would understand the true meaning of burden and responsibility. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this deception ran, and what my daughter really thought about the mother who had given her everything. The phone call I was about to make would crack open a truth that would change both our lives forever. The first crack in my understanding of Sophia's true feelings appeared the next morning when I decided to call her before she could send another casual request for money. I needed to hear her voice, to see if I could detect any trace of the contempt she'd displayed so casually in her video. Maybe, I hoped desperately, the social media post had been some kind of aberration, a moment of poor judgment rather than a reflection of her genuine feelings. I called her at 8:30, the same time I'd been calling every morning for the past 2 years. Usually she answered on the second ring with a cheerful, "Good morning, sunshine," or some variation that acknowledged our daily ritual. This time, the phone rang 4 times before she picked up with a distracted, "Oh, hey, Mom." "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice normal despite the storm of emotions churning in my chest. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine," she replied, but there was an edge to her voice I'd never noticed before. Or maybe I had noticed it but dismissed it as work stress or morning grogginess. "Actually, I'm kind of busy this morning. We have a big client presentation today and I'm still prepping." This was new. Sophia had never been too busy for our morning calls before, often staying on the phone for 15 or 20 minutes, even when she was rushing to get ready for work. She would multitask, putting me on speaker while she did her makeup or ate breakfast, including me in the mundane details of her morning routine. "Of course," I said quickly. "I don't want to keep you. I was just wondering if you'd given any thought to what I mentioned yesterday about maybe having dinner this weekend. I thought we could try that new Italian place you've been wanting to check out." There was a pause long enough to make me uncomfortable. "Actually, Mom, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. I think maybe we should space out our visits a little more. I've been feeling kind of overwhelmed lately with work and everything, and I need some breathing room." Breathing room. The phrase hit me like a slap. In the context of yesterday's video, where she'd talked about me being suffocating and treating her like my emotional support system, those 2 words carried a weight that made my hands shake. "Oh," I managed to say, "I didn't realize I was overwhelming you. I thought you enjoyed our Sunday dinners." "I do," she said quickly, but her tone suggested otherwise. "It's just that sometimes it feels like you need constant reassurance about everything, and I'm trying to establish better boundaries in all my relationships. My therapist says it's important for people my age to prioritize their own emotional needs." Her therapist. This was the first I'd heard about Sophia seeing a therapist, and the revelation stung. Not because I disapproved of therapy, quite the opposite, but because it meant she'd been discussing our relationship with a professional without ever mentioning to me that she felt it needed professional intervention. "I understand," I said, though I didn't understand at all. I never want to be a source of stress for you. Maybe you could help me understand what I'm doing that feels overwhelming so I can be more mindful of it." Another pause. When Sophia spoke again, her voice had that careful, practiced tone she used when delivering difficult news to clients. "It's not any one thing, Mom. It's more about the overall dynamic, like calling every single day and needing to know every detail of my life, asking my opinion about everything from what you should wear to whether you should get highlights, the constant updates about the flower shop and your customers. And then there's the whole thing with Robert." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Everything I thought represented closeness and mutual interest in each other's lives was actually suffocating neediness in her eyes. The mother who thought she was sharing her life with her adult daughter was actually dumping emotional labor on someone who resented the burden. "I see," I said quietly. "And the thing with Robert? Mom, you're 58 years old. You don't need my permission to date someone or my analysis of every conversation you have with him. It's weird to be that involved in your mom's love life." The casual cruelty of her tone was breathtaking. She wasn't angry or emotional. She was simply stating facts as she saw them. Facts that painted me as an inappropriate, boundary-crossing mother who didn't understand normal adult relationships. "I thought you wanted to be involved," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "When you offered to meet him, I thought that meant you cared about my happiness." "I do care about your happiness," Sophia said, but there was impatience creeping into her voice. "But your happiness can't be my responsibility. That's what I'm trying to explain about boundaries." Boundaries. Another therapy buzzword that transformed my expressions of love into violations of appropriate behavior. I wondered what else my daughter's therapist had helped her reframe about our relationship. Did my pride in her accomplishments constitute emotional manipulation? Did my willingness to help her financially represent an unhealthy dynamic that prevented her from achieving true independence? "I should probably get going," Sophia continued. "Like I said, big presentation today. Can we talk later this week?" "Of course," I said automatically. "Good luck with your presentation." "I love you." "Love you too," she replied, but the words sounded obligatory rather than heartfelt. The line went dead, leaving me sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while my world realigned itself around this new understanding of my daughter's feelings. I spent the rest of that morning replaying every interaction we'd had over the past 6 months, viewing them through the lens of what Sophia had revealed. Conversations I'd thought were warm and connected now seemed one-sided and burdensome. My excitement about sharing good news from the flower shop became inappropriate oversharing. My requests for advice became demands for emotional labor. The most painful realization was that this shift in Sophia's perception hadn't happened overnight. The careful, therapeutic language she'd used suggested months of discussions about our relationship, months of her building resentment, while I remained obliviously happy with what I thought was a close mother-daughter bond. That afternoon, I found myself doing something I'd never done before. I created a fake social media account to look at Sophia's other posts without her knowing I was watching. What I found there opened up an entirely new understanding of how my daughter had been presenting her life, and my place in it, to the world. Scrolling through months of content, I saw a carefully curated version of Sophia's life that barely included me at all. Photos of her beautiful house that never mentioned the help I'd provided with the down payment and monthly payments. Posts about her career accomplishments that never acknowledged the college education I'd sacrificed to provide. Glamorous photos of nights out with friends that never included the woman who babysat her neighbor's children so Sophia could afford those outfits and dinners. But what hurt most were the subtle references to family stress and the challenges of dealing with, quote, difficult relatives. Motivational quotes about setting boundaries with, quote, toxic people. Inspirational posts about breaking cycles of codependency and emotional manipulation. My daughter had been building a public narrative about her life that cast me as the obstacle she was bravely overcoming, rather than the foundation that had made her success possible. The comments on these posts revealed that her followers saw her as a strong, independent woman who was admirably managing family drama with maturity and grace. They praised her for prioritizing her mental health and establishing healthy boundaries. They offered sympathy for her situation and encouragement for her courage in addressing difficult family dynamics. I was the difficult family dynamic. I was the toxic relative she needed boundaries with. I was the cycle of dysfunction she was breaking. And I had no idea any of this narrative existed until I watched her video calling me a burden. That evening, I received the text I'd been expecting since hanging up from our morning call. "Hey, Mom. I know this is short notice, but could you help me with the mortgage payment again this month? The presentation today went really well, but the client won't be making a decision until next week, so I won't get paid until probably mid-November. I promise I'll get caught up once this project comes through." The same casual tone. The same assumption that I would say yes. The same promise that this was temporary. The better times were coming, that my help was appreciated even if it wasn't acknowledged publicly. But now I understood that each time she asked for help, she was simultaneously building resentment about my place in her life. I wasn't a supportive mother. I was an obligation she couldn't escape. I set the phone aside without responding and made myself a simple dinner of soup and toast. As I ate alone in my small apartment, surrounded by the flowers I'd brought home from the shop, I realized that I'd been living in an illusion. The close relationship I thought I had with my daughter was actually a transactional arrangement where I provided financial support and emotional availability in exchange for the pretense of affection and respect. But Sophia had stopped pretending, at least publicly. She was ready to call me a burden while still expecting me to act like a safety net. She wanted the benefits of having a devoted mother, without the social cost of acknowledging that devotion. She wanted my money and support, while publicly positioning herself as the mature adult dealing with an inappropriate, needy parent. The woman who had spent 35 years defining herself primarily as Sophia's mother was finally seeing clearly how Sophia defined her in return. And what she saw was going to change everything. The next morning brought a revelation that shifted my understanding of the situation from personal betrayal to something much more calculated and disturbing. I was arranging flowers for a wedding when my phone rang with a call from my sister Janet, who lived 3 states away but had somehow seen Sophia's viral video. "Hattie," Janet said without preamble, "I need to tell you something about that video, and you're not going to like it." My hand stilled on the roses I'd been trimming. "What do you mean?" "I showed it to my daughter Emma, the one who works in social media marketing. She said Sophia's account isn't just some casual personal page. She's been building it as a platform, trying to become an influencer. Emma says the video about you was strategically posted to go viral. She used all the right hashtags, posted at peak engagement time, everything." The roses fell from my hands as Janet's words sank in. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Sophia didn't just casually share her feelings about you, Hattie. She planned that video to get maximum visibility. Emma showed me her other posts, and apparently she's been building up to this for months. Posts about family drama, boundary setting, dealing with difficult relatives. She was creating a narrative that led up to that video about you." I sank into the chair behind the counter, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "You're telling me she exploited our relationship for social media content?" "Emma thinks so. She said Sophia's been growing her following by positioning herself as this strong, independent woman who overcomes family dysfunction. The video about you was her biggest viral moment yet." Emma checked her analytics. She gained over 15,000 new followers just from that one post. 15,000 new followers. My humiliation had been monetized. My daughter had turned her mother's love and sacrifice into content that advanced her personal brand. The woman I'd raised with such care had calculated that publicly destroying me would be worth more than protecting me. "Janet," I said slowly, "how long has Emma been following Sophia's account?" "About 6 months. She actually started following her because of the content about difficult family members. Emma thought it was relatable since she's been dealing with her own issues with Derek's mother." 6 months. For half a year, my daughter had been building an audience by sharing carefully crafted versions of our private family dynamics. She'd been testing content, refining her message, and building toward the moment when she would directly identify me as the burden she was heroically managing. "There's something else," Janet continued. "Emma said influencers at Sophia's level, with the engagement she's getting, can make decent money from brand partnerships and sponsored content. She thinks Sophia is positioning herself to monetize this whole thing." I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what Janet was telling me. This wasn't just a daughter expressing frustration about her mother. This was a business strategy. Sophia had identified a market for content about overcoming family dysfunction, and she had leveraged her relationship with me to capture that market. "I have to go," I told Janet. "I need to think about this." "Hattie, I'm so sorry. I know this hurts, but I thought you should know what you're really dealing with." After ending the call, I sat in my flower shop, surrounded by the beauty I created every day with my own hands, trying to understand how I'd raised a daughter who could commodify my love for her own gain. The daily phone calls she now characterized as suffocating had been content research. The family dinners she claimed were overwhelming had been opportunities to gather material for her posts about managing difficult relatives. Every vulnerable moment I'd shared with her, every time I'd asked for advice or support, had potentially been filed away as material for her growing platform about setting boundaries with toxic family members. When I'd told her about my fears regarding my relationship with Robert, I wasn't seeking her guidance as my daughter. I was providing her with content about inappropriate parental oversharing. The financial help she'd been asking for took on a new dimension too. If Sophia was making money from her social media presence, if she was positioning herself for brand partnerships and sponsored content, then her requests for mortgage help weren't about genuine financial need. They were about maintaining a lifestyle that supported her image, while keeping me in my role as the enabling parent she could publicly overcome. I opened my laptop and began researching social media monetization, influencer marketing, and the kind of engagement numbers that translate to actual income. What I learned made my stomach turn. Sophia's account had the reach and engagement rates that could generate significant revenue through the right partnerships. Content about family dynamics, mental health, and personal growth was particularly valuable to brands targeting young women. My daughter had turned me into a character in her monetized personal narrative. The sacrificial mother who didn't understand boundaries. The burden that strong, independent women like her had to learn to manage. The cautionary tale that made her audience feel smart and empowered by comparison. But the most devastating realization was yet to come. If this was all calculated content creation, if my humiliation had been planned and executed for financial gain, then what did that say about every moment of our relationship I'd thought was genuine? How much of Sophia's affection had been performed for an audience I didn't know existed? That night, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. If my daughter wanted to build her brand by presenting herself as the responsible adult managing her burdensome mother, then she was about to discover what it really meant to be responsible for her own life. The safety net she'd been taking for granted while publicly mocking was about to disappear, and I was going to document every moment of her reaction. Two could play at the social media game, and I was about to teach my daughter that the mother she'd underestimated had been supporting more than just her mortgage payments. I'd been supporting an entire fantasy of independence that was about to come crashing down in the most public way possible. The gloves were coming off, and Sophia was about to learn that turning your mother into content comes with consequences she never could have anticipated. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it began the moment I stopped answering Sophia's texts about money. For 3 days, her messages sat unread on my phone, while I researched everything I could about social media influencers, brand partnerships, and the kind of income someone with her following could generate. What I discovered made me realize that my daughter's financial struggles were likely as fabricated as her public persona. According to the analytics tools I'd learned to use, Sophia's account was generating enough engagement to command significant fees for sponsored posts. Her follower count had exploded to over 200,000 in the weeks following her video about me, and brands were already reaching out for collaborations. Fashion companies, lifestyle products, even therapy apps were sliding into her direct messages with partnership offers that could easily cover her mortgage payment and more. My daughter wasn't struggling financially. She was building a business empire on the foundation of family dysfunction, with me cast as the primary antagonist in her success story. Every dollar I'd given her had freed up her actual income to fund the lifestyle and image that made her content more appealing to brands and followers. When Sophia finally called me directly, her voice carried an edge of panic I'd never heard before. "Mom, I've been texting you for 3 days about the mortgage payment. I really need an answer because the payment is due tomorrow and I haven't heard back from you. I let the silence stretch between us before responding. I got your messages. Okay, so can you help me out? I know it's more than usual, but I had some unexpected expenses this month and I'm really in a bind. More than usual. I pulled out the notebook where I'd been tracking every payment I'd made on Sophia's behalf over the past 3 years. The amounts had steadily increased from a few $100s here and there to over $2,000 per month. What had started as emergency assistance had become a regular subsidy that allowed Sophia to maintain a lifestyle her actual income couldn't support. Sophia, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day about boundaries and emotional responsibility, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. You're absolutely right that my happiness shouldn't be your responsibility. By the same logic, your mortgage payments shouldn't be mine. The silence that followed was so complete, I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Mom, I understand you might be upset about what I said, but this isn't the time for games. I have a contractual obligation to make this payment tomorrow, or I could lose the house. Games. She thought my newfound clarity about our relationship was a game. A manipulation tactic designed to punish her for speaking her truth about my burdensome behavior. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so painful. I'm not playing games, sweetheart. I'm taking your advice about establishing healthier boundaries. You've made it clear that my involvement in your life feels suffocating, so I'm stepping back to give you the independence you need. That's not what I meant, and you know it, Sophia said, her carefully maintained composure starting to crack. I was talking about emotional boundaries, not financial ones. This is completely different. Apparently, emotional independence from her burdensome mother was essential for Sophia's well-being, but financial dependence on that same mother was perfectly acceptable. She wanted me to stop calling daily and asking for advice, but continue funding her lifestyle without question or acknowledgement. Help me understand the difference, I said. You've explained that my emotional needs feel overwhelming to you, that asking for your advice and wanting to share details of my life constitutes inappropriate behavior on my part. But somehow my financial resources are still appropriately available to meet your needs? Mom, you're twisting everything around. The financial help is temporary, and you know I appreciate it. The other stuff is about healthy communication patterns. Temporary. For 3 years, every request had been described as temporary. Every promise to pay me back had been forgotten within weeks. Every month brought a new emergency or unexpected expense that required my intervention. The only thing temporary about our financial arrangement was Sophia's memory of previous assistance. I've been keeping track of the money I've given you over the past 3 years, I said, opening my notebook to the page where I'd calculated the total. Including the down payment help, monthly mortgage assistance, car repairs, medical bills, and various emergencies, the amount comes to $78,000. The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line told me that Sophia had never added up these numbers herself. She'd been thinking of each request as an isolated incident, rather than part of a pattern that had drained my savings and retirement funds. I didn't realize it was that much, she said quietly. But Mom, I can't just suddenly come up with the mortgage payment overnight. If you don't help me this month, I could lose everything we've both invested in this house. Everything we've both invested. Even in crisis, Sophia couldn't acknowledge that the investment had been almost entirely mine. Her contribution had been signing the papers and picking out paint colors while I provided the actual money that made it possible. I understand that would be difficult, I said. But I'm sure someone with your social media following and brand partnerships can find alternative solutions. I've learned quite a lot about influencer marketing lately, and it seems like you have resources available that don't require depending on your emotionally burdensome mother. The silence that followed was different from her previous pauses. This wasn't Sophia collecting her thoughts or choosing her words carefully. This was the silence of someone realizing that their secret had been discovered. I don't know what you think you know about my social media accounts, she said finally, but whatever you've heard is probably exaggerated. I'm not making the kind of money people think influencers make. Not making the kind of money people think influencers make. A careful denial that admitted to making some money while downplaying the amount. I'd spent enough time researching her metrics to know that even conservative estimates of her earning potential would easily cover her mortgage payments. "I'm sure you're not," I said agreeably, "but I'm also sure you understand why I need to focus my financial resources on my own future, rather than continuing to subsidize yours. You've helped me realize that I've been enabling an unhealthy dynamic between us." Enabling. I used her own therapeutic language against her, watching how quickly she could pivot from victim to aggressor when her financial pipeline was threatened. "This is ridiculous," Sophia said, her voice rising with frustration. "You're punishing me for being honest about some communication issues by threatening my housing security." "That's not establishing boundaries, Mom. That's emotional manipulation." Emotional manipulation. According to Sophia, my willingness to help her financially for 3 years while she built a career and social media following constituted appropriate maternal support. But my decision to stop providing that help after discovering she'd been publicly mocking me for it constituted emotional manipulation. "I'm not threatening anything," I replied calmly. "I'm simply making the same kind of adult decision you've been encouraging me to make. You've been very clear that you need space to establish your independence and manage your own emotional needs. I'm giving you that space." "Fine," Sophia said, her voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. "If this is how you want to handle things, I'll figure it out myself. But don't expect me to pretend this isn't exactly the kind of dramatic, guilt-inducing behavior that made me need boundaries in the first place." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone with a mixture of sadness and liberation. For the first time in 3 years, I'd had a conversation with my daughter where I wasn't the one apologizing, accommodating, or scrambling to meet her needs. Instead, I'd simply stated my position and let her react however she chose. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I cooked myself a real dinner, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat down to eat without checking my phone every few minutes for messages from Sophia. The quiet in my apartment felt peaceful rather than lonely, and I realized how much mental energy I'd been spending on managing her needs and crises. The next morning brought the first indication of how Sophia intended to handle our new dynamic. Instead of calling me directly, she posted a carefully crafted message on her social media accounts that painted our situation in terms that would generate maximum sympathy from her followers. "Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally use that love as a weapon," the post began. "I'm dealing with a family situation right now where setting healthy boundaries has triggered exactly the kind of manipulative behavior that made those boundaries necessary in the first place. It's heartbreaking when a parent chooses punishment over personal growth, but it's also confirmation that you made the right choice in protecting your peace." The comments flooded in immediately. Hundreds of followers offering support, sharing their own stories of family dysfunction, and praising Sophia for her strength in standing up to toxic relatives. Several people specifically mentioned how inspiring it was to see her maintain her boundaries even when faced with financial retaliation. Financial retaliation. My decision to stop subsidizing my daughter's lifestyle had been reframed as punishment for her honesty. The woman who had spent 3 years providing tens of thousands of dollars in support was now being characterized as weaponizing that support to manipulate her brave, boundary-setting daughter. But what struck me most about the post wasn't its content, but its timing. Sophia had crafted and published this message within hours of our phone conversation, which meant she'd been prepared for my reaction. She'd anticipated that I might eventually refuse to continue funding her lifestyle, and she'd already developed a narrative framework to turn my refusal into content that would generate engagement and sympathy. This wasn't a daughter struggling with a difficult family situation. This was a content creator who had calculated exactly how to monetize every aspect of our relationship, including its destruction. Over the next few days, I watched Sophia's social media activity with the fascination of someone observing a masterclass in manipulation. She didn't directly mention our financial arrangement or acknowledge the 3 years of support I'd provided. Instead, she focused on the emotional aspects of our relationship, positioning herself as a mature adult who was being punished for trying to establish healthy communication patterns. She shared articles about financial abuse and emotional manipulation. She posted inspirational quotes about choosing yourself when family members refuse to support your growth. She created a series of videos about recognizing manipulative behavior in relationships, using examples that were clearly drawn from our conversations but presented in ways that made me sound unreasonable and controlling. Her engagement rates skyrocketed. Each post about family dysfunction and boundary setting received thousands of likes and hundreds of comments from followers who saw her as a role model for handling difficult relatives. Brand partnerships rolled in as companies recognized the value of aligning with someone who represented empowerment and personal growth. Meanwhile, I received a steady stream of messages from friends and acquaintances who had seen her content. Some were supportive, expressing outrage at how Sophia was representing our relationship. Others were more cautious, asking if there were problems between us that they hadn't been aware of. A few seemed to believe Sophia's version of events, treating me with the careful sympathy reserved for people who were causing their own problems. The most painful message came from Mrs. Rodriguez, one of my longtime customers at the flower shop. "Hattie, dear, I saw some troubling things online about you and Sophia. I hope you know that whatever problems you're having, there are people who can help you learn better ways to communicate with your daughter. Family relationships are so important, and I'd hate to see yours damaged by misunderstandings." Mrs. Rodriguez, who had watched me work 60-hour weeks to put Sophia through college, now thought I needed help learning how to communicate with my daughter. The narrative Sophia had created was so compelling that even people who knew me personally were beginning to question whether I might be the problem in our relationship. That's when I realized that Sophia's strategy went beyond just monetizing our conflict. She was systematically rewriting the history of our relationship to establish herself as the victim and me as the aggressor. If she could convince enough people that I was a manipulative, boundary-crossing mother, then any consequences she faced for her behavior could be attributed to my dysfunction, rather than her choices. But Sophia had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed that the mother she'd been taking advantage of for years was the same woman who would continue to absorb her attacks without fighting back. She'd built her entire strategy around the belief that I would never publicly defend myself or challenge her narrative. She was about to discover how wrong she was. The breaking point came when I received a certified letter from a law firm representing something called Content Protection Services. The letter informed me that I was potentially violating my daughter's intellectual property rights by monitoring and attempting to interfere with her creative content and professional activities. Apparently, Sophia had discovered my fake social media account and interpreted my observation of her public posts as stalking and harassment. The legal letter demanded that I cease all monitoring of her social media activities and refrain from any attempts to contact her business partners or brand sponsors. The letter also included a, quote, cease and desist demand regarding any public statements I might make about Sophia or her content. According to her lawyers, any attempt to defame or misrepresent her online presence could result in legal action for damages to her professional reputation and earning potential. My daughter was threatening to sue me for watching her public social media posts and potentially speaking about our relationship. The woman who had been monetizing our family drama for months was now claiming legal protection against my participation in that same drama. I sat in my flower shop that afternoon, surrounded by the autumn arrangements I'd been working on, and felt something shift inside me that had nothing to do with hurt or sadness. For the first time since discovering Sophia's video, I felt genuinely angry. Not the wounded anger of a mother whose love had been rejected, but the cold fury of someone who had been systematically manipulated and was finally seeing the full scope of the deception. Sophia had spent 3 years taking my money while building resentment about my emotional needs. She'd turned our private relationship into public content without my knowledge or consent. She'd painted me as a toxic burden while continuing to depend on my financial support. And now she was threatening legal action to prevent me from defending myself against her public attacks. The flower shop had been my sanctuary for 15 years, the place where I'd built something beautiful and meaningful with my own hands. As I looked around at the evidence of my independence and creativity, I realized that Sophia had been wrong about more than just my emotional strength. She'd also drastically underestimated my intelligence, my resourcefulness, and my capacity for strategic thinking. If my daughter wanted to play the long game, using legal threats and public manipulation to control the narrative around our relationship, Then she was about to discover that her mother had learned a few things about strategy during her years of building a business from nothing. The woman who had raised Sophia to be strong and independent was about to demonstrate exactly where she'd learned those qualities. And by the time I was finished, everyone would understand who had really been carrying whom in our relationship. That evening, I called my sister Janet. "I need Emma's help with something," I said. It's time Sophia learned that two can play at the social media game, and her mother isn't as technologically helpless as she thinks. The war was about to begin, and I had weapons Sophia didn't even know existed. Chief among them was the truth, backed up by 3 years of financial records that would tell a very different story than the one she'd been selling to her followers. My daughter had built her platform on the foundation of calling me a burden. She was about to discover what it felt like when that burden suddenly disappeared, taking with it all the stability and security she'd been taking for granted. The foreclosure notice I was about to post would just be the beginning. Emma arrived at my apartment the following Saturday morning with a laptop bag and the kind of determined expression I recognized from her mother. At 28, Janet's daughter had built a successful career in digital marketing, and she approached social media strategy with the analytical precision of someone who understood exactly how influence translated to income. "Aunt Hattie," she said, settling onto my couch and opening her laptop, "before we start planning your response, I need you to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Sophia isn't just some girl with a popular account. She's running a sophisticated business operation." Emma pulled up a series of spreadsheets and analytics dashboards that made my head spin. Charts showing engagement rates, follower demographics, and revenue projections filled her screen as she walked me through the financial reality of Sophia's online presence. Based on her current metrics, Sophia is making between $8,000 and $12,000 per month from brand partnerships alone, Emma explained. That doesn't include affiliate marketing, sponsored content, or the digital products she's starting to sell. Her video about you generated enough new followers to potentially double that income, $12,000 per month. While I'd been scraping together money from my flower shop savings to help with her mortgage payments, Sophia had been earning more in a month than I made in 3. The daughter who had been crying poverty was actually out-earning me by a factor of 4 to 1. "There's more," Emma continued, clicking through to another dashboard. "She's been accepted into several high-paying affiliate programs, and she's in talks with a major wellness brand about becoming their spokesperson. That contract alone could be worth 6 figures annually." I stared at the numbers on Emma's screen, trying to process the magnitude of Sophia's deception. She hadn't just been taking my money unnecessarily. She'd been taking it while building a fortune from content that portrayed me as the financial burden in our relationship. "How long has she been making this kind of money?" I asked. "The serious income started about 18 months ago," Emma said. "That's when her follower count hit the threshold, where brands really start paying attention. But here's the thing, Aunt Hattie, her most profitable content has consistently been about family dysfunction and overcoming toxic relationships." 18 months. For a year and a half, Sophia had been financially capable of supporting herself entirely, while continuing to ask for my help with increasing frequency. Every sob story about unexpected expenses and temporary cash flow problems had been a performance designed to maintain her access to my savings while she built her wealth from our family's pain. Emma pulled up another screen, showing Sophia's content calendar and posting strategy. She's been systematically escalating the family drama narrative because it gets the highest engagement. Posts about boundary setting and toxic parents perform 3 times better than her lifestyle or fashion content. The clinical language Emma used helped me understand what I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. My relationship with Sophia hadn't deteriorated naturally over time. It had been deliberately damaged by someone who discovered that family conflict was more profitable than family harmony. "What about the legal threats?" I asked, showing Emma the cease and desist letter I'd received. Emma read through the document with the expression of someone who had seen similar tactics before. "This is mostly intimidation," she said finally. "She's trying to scare you into staying quiet while she controls the narrative. But here's what she doesn't realize. Everything she's posted about you is public domain, and you have every right to respond to allegations that affect your reputation. You're saying I can defend myself? I'm saying you can do more than defend yourself. You can go on the offensive. Emma closed her laptop and looked at me directly. Sophia built her platform by positioning herself as the victim of family dysfunction. But she made one crucial mistake. She documented all the evidence that proves she's actually the one exploiting the family relationship. Emma explained her strategy with the methodical precision of someone who had spent years understanding how social media algorithms rewarded different types of content. We weren't just going to respond to Sophia's attacks. We were going to systematically dismantle the false narrative she'd constructed about our relationship. The key is documentation, Emma said. We're going to show your followers exactly how much financial support you've provided while Sophia was publicly calling you a burden. Bank records, payment confirmations, text message screenshots, everything that proves she's been lying about her financial situation. The plan Emma outlined was more comprehensive than anything I could have imagined. We would create social media accounts that showcased my actual life, the successful business I'd built, the community relationships I'd maintained, the independence I'd achieved as a single mother. Then we would methodically present evidence that contradicted every aspect of Sophia's victim narrative. But we're not going to attack her directly, Emma emphasized. We're going to let the facts speak for themselves. When people see the contrast between what she's been saying and what actually happened, they'll draw their own conclusions. That afternoon, Emma helped me set up professional social media accounts that presented an accurate picture of my life. Photos of my flower shop showcased the business I'd built from nothing. Pictures with my regular customers demonstrated the community relationships I'd maintained for years. Images of the arrangements I created highlighted the artistic skills I'd developed through decades of practice. For the first time, I was presenting myself to the world as I actually was, rather than as filtered through Sophia's distorted perspective. The woman in these photos wasn't a needy burden, clinging to her daughter for validation. She was an accomplished businesswoman who had built something meaningful with her own hands. Now comes the hard part, Emma said as we prepared to publish my first post. We're going to tell your story, but we're going to do it strategically. Each post will reveal another piece of evidence that contradicts Sophia's narrative, but we're going to space them out to maximize impact. My first post was simple but powerful. A photo of me in my flower shop, surrounded by arrangements I'd created for a local wedding, with a caption that read, "Building something beautiful takes time, patience, and the willingness to start over when necessary." After 35 years of single motherhood and 15 years of business ownership, I'm learning that sometimes the biggest growth happens when you stop trying to please people who see your love as a burden. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, I had hundreds of comments from people who recognized the strength required to build a life from nothing. Many shared their own stories of being misunderstood or taken advantage of by family members. Several customers from my flower shop found my account and left glowing testimonials about my work and character. But the most significant response came from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Robert, the man I'd been having coffee with before Sophia's video made me question whether seeking companionship was inappropriate, sent me a private message that brought tears to my eyes. "Hattie, I had no idea what you'd been going through with your daughter. The woman I've gotten to know over the past few months is nothing like the person she described in that video. You're one of the strongest, most independent people I've ever met, and I hope you know that whatever issues she's dealing with have nothing to do with who you actually are." Robert's message reminded me of something I'd lost in the aftermath of Sophia's attacks, the perspective of people who actually knew me. While I'd been absorbing my daughter's criticism and wondering if I really was too needy or clingy, the rest of my community had continued to see me as the capable, independent woman I'd always been. Emma monitored Sophia's accounts throughout that first week, tracking how my daughter responded to my sudden online presence. The reaction was swift and telling. Within days of my first post, Sophia published a series of stories about family members who violate your privacy by stalking your social media, and, quote, narcissistic parents who can't handle being held accountable. "She's panicking," Emma observed. "Look at her posting frequency. It's tripled since you went online. She's flooding her accounts with content, trying to reinforce her narrative before you can establish yours." The panic in Sophia's content was evident to anyone who understood social media psychology. Her posts became more desperate, her language more extreme. She started using terms like harassment and cyberstalking to describe my public presence, trying to frame my decision to join social media as an attack on her rather than my right to tell my own story. But Emma had anticipated this reaction. Phase 2, she announced, pulling up the next series of posts we'd prepared. Now we start presenting the financial evidence. The post that changed everything was elegant in its simplicity. A photo of a handwritten thank you note Sophia had sent me after I helped with her house down payment, paired with a bank transfer receipt showing the $5,000 payment I'd made. The caption read, "Grateful daughters become independent women. Supporting your children's dreams means celebrating their success, not subsidizing their resentment." The response was explosive. Within hours, the post had been shared thousands of times by people who recognized the disconnect between Sophia's public claims about my financial irresponsibility and the evidence of my actual support for her success. Comments poured in from parents who had experienced similar situations with adult children who demanded support while resenting the source of that support. But more importantly, people began to question the authenticity of Sophia's entire narrative. If she had been lying about the financial dynamics of our relationship, what else had she misrepresented? The carefully constructed image of a mature daughter, managing her burden of a mother, started to crumble as people realized they'd only been hearing one side of a much more complex story. Emma tracked the ripple effects across both our accounts. "Sophia's engagement is dropping," she reported. "People are starting to ask questions in her comments. Some of her followers are finding your account and comparing the stories. The tide is turning." The turning point came when I posted a screenshot of Sophia's text requesting mortgage help, sent just hours after she'd published her video calling me a burden. The timing was impossible to explain away, and it demonstrated the exact kind of manipulative behavior she'd been accusing me of displaying. The same day she told the internet I was a financial burden, she asked me to pay her mortgage, I wrote. Sometimes the truth lives in the timestamps. That post went viral in ways I never could have anticipated. It was shared across multiple platforms by accounts with millions of followers, people who recognized the profound hypocrisy of Sophia's actions. Comments sections filled with stories from other parents who had experienced similar manipulation from adult children, who portrayed their support as burden while continuing to benefit from it. Sophia's response was swift and increasingly desperate. She posted a live video claiming that I was taking private family communications out of context and, quote, weaponizing financial discussions to humiliate her publicly. She accused me of violating her privacy and damaging her professional reputation through my calculated attack on her character. But the live video backfired spectacularly. Viewers could see the panic in her eyes, the defensive posture of someone whose lies were being exposed in real time. Comments during the live stream were overwhelmingly skeptical, with many people pointing out that she had initiated the public discussion of our relationship and couldn't now claim privacy when the full story was being revealed. "She's losing control of the narrative," Emma observed, watching Sophia's follower count begin to decline for the first time in months. "People don't like being lied to, and they especially don't like being used as props in someone else's manipulation scheme." The most damaging revelation came when I posted a compilation of Sophia's social media earnings over the past 18 months, calculated from publicly available sponsorship data and affiliate marketing disclosures. The evidence showed that she had been earning substantial income from content about our family dysfunction, while simultaneously requesting financial assistance from me. "Turning your mother into a cautionary tale is apparently quite profitable," I wrote. "But profiting from manufactured family drama while accepting money from the person you're demonizing crosses a line that most people recognize as fundamentally wrong." The post sparked conversations about influencer ethics, family exploitation, and the psychological impact of turning private relationships into public content. Mental health professionals shared it as an example of how social media could incentivize the commodification of personal trauma and family conflict. But the real impact was on Sophia's brand partnerships. Companies began distancing themselves from someone whose success was built on documented deception and family exploitation. The wellness brand that had been considering her for a spokesperson role quietly ended negotiations. Affiliate programs suspended her accounts pending review of her content practices. Emma showed me the analytics with satisfaction. Her engagement rates are in freefall, she said. People are unfollowing in droves. More importantly, the algorithms are starting to suppress her content because the negative engagement is outweighing the positive. For someone who had built their entire income stream on social media influence, the algorithmic suppression was potentially catastrophic. Fewer people would see her content, leading to lower engagement rates, which would result in reduced brand interest and declining revenue. Within 2 weeks of my first post, Sophia's carefully constructed empire was crumbling. The daughter who had threatened legal action to prevent me from defending myself was now experiencing the consequences of her own choices in the most public way possible. But I wasn't finished yet. The final phase of Emma's strategy would demonstrate exactly how much support I'd been providing, and what happened when that support disappeared entirely. The foreclosure notice I was about to reveal would show the world what happened when someone who had been calling their supporter a burden suddenly had to face life without that burden to lean on. Sophia had wanted independence from her overwhelming mother. She was about to get exactly what she'd asked for, in the most public and humiliating way possible. The mother she'd characterized as a burden was about to prove that she had actually been the backbone, holding her daughter's entire lifestyle together. The reckoning was coming, and this time, everyone would be watching. The foreclosure notice arrived at Sophia's house on a Thursday morning in November, and I knew because I was the one who arranged for it to be delivered. 3 months without my financial assistance had finally caught up with my daughter's carefully curated lifestyle, and the house she'd been so proud of was about to become the most public symbol of her dependence on the mother she'd called a burden. Emma had helped me time the revelation perfectly. We waited until Sophia had exhausted her savings trying to maintain her mortgage payments without my help, until she'd liquidated her emergency funds and maxed out her credit cards. We watched as her social media content became increasingly desperate, filled with sponsored posts for quick cash apps and get-rich-quick schemes that damaged her credibility with the audience she'd worked so hard to build. When the foreclosure proceedings became public record, I posted a screenshot of the legal notice alongside a simple caption that would become the most shared content of my entire social media presence. When you spend years calling someone a burden, you might forget to notice they were actually carrying the load. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the post had been shared over 100,000 times across multiple platforms. Comments poured in from people who had followed our story from the beginning, expressing a mixture of satisfaction at seeing justice served and sympathy for a situation that could have been avoided if honesty had prevailed over manipulation. But the real impact wasn't just the viral nature of the post. It was the complete collapse of Sophia's credibility with the audience she'd spent years cultivating. The foreclosure notice proved beyond any doubt that her claims of financial independence had been fabricated, that the burden she'd described so eloquently to her followers had actually been the foundation keeping her entire life stable. Emma monitored the fallout with professional detachment. She's lost 60% of her followers in the past week, she reported. The ones remaining are mostly there for entertainment value, waiting to see what happens next. Her engagement rate has dropped to below 1%, which means brands won't touch her with a 10-foot pole. For someone who had built their entire income on social media influence, these numbers represented complete professional devastation. Sophia had gone from being a rising star in the influencer world to being a cautionary tale about the dangers of exploiting family relationships for content. The personal impact was equally severe. Mutual friends and acquaintances began reaching out to me with stories of their own interactions with Sophia, revealing a pattern of behavior I'd been too close to see clearly. Sarah, a former colleague from Sophia's marketing job, told me about how my daughter had badmouthed me at office parties, describing me as clingy and financially irresponsible while conveniently omitting that I was funding her lifestyle. I always wondered how she could afford that house on her salary, Sarah admitted during a phone call that left me reeling. Now I understand why she was so bitter about family obligations. She was taking your money and resenting you for it at the same time. The revelation that Sophia had been publicly mocking me in professional settings while privately depending on my support added another layer to my understanding of her manipulation. She hadn't just been building an online audience by exploiting our relationship. She'd been doing the same thing in her offline social circles. More disturbing were the messages I received from other parents who had seen themselves in my story. Dozens of mothers and fathers reached out to share their own experiences of adult children who demanded financial support while publicly portraying their parents as burdens or embarrassments. The epidemic of family exploitation for social media content was apparently much more widespread than I'd realized. One message particularly stood out, from a father named David, whose son had built a popular YouTube channel by documenting their family's toxic dynamics while living rent-free in David's basement. "I didn't understand what was happening until I saw your posts," he wrote. "I thought I was helping my son build his career, but I was actually paying him to destroy my reputation." Reading these messages helped me understand that Sophia's behavior wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was part of a larger cultural shift, where family relationships had become commodified for entertainment and profit. The sacred bonds between parents and children were being sacrificed for engagement metrics and brand partnerships. But understanding the broader context didn't diminish the personal pain of watching my daughter's life implode in real time. Despite everything she'd done, despite the public humiliation and years of manipulation, watching her lose her house brought me no joy. The mother in me wanted to reach out, to offer help, to try one more time to repair what had been broken between us. That impulse was tested when Sophia finally broke her social media silence with a post that revealed the depth of her desperation. Gone was the confident influencer who had built her brand on boundary setting and family dysfunction. In her place was a young woman facing the consequences of her choices, asking her remaining followers for donations to help her avoid homelessness. "I made mistakes," she wrote in a post that was starkly different from her usual polished content. "I let pride and anger cloud my judgment, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I'm facing the consequences of my actions now, and I take full responsibility for where I am. But I'm also asking for help from anyone who believes in second chances and redemption." The comments on that post were brutal. Former followers who felt manipulated by her previous content showed no mercy in pointing out the irony of someone who had mocked her mother's neediness, now begging strangers for money. The same audience that had once praised her for setting boundaries was now disgusted by what they saw as crocodile tears and manipulation. Reading those comments, I felt something I hadn't expected: protectiveness. Despite everything Sophia had done to me, seeing her being torn apart by the very audience she'd cultivated through our family's pain-activated instincts I thought she'd killed, she was still my daughter, and watching her public destruction felt like watching a part of myself die. That's when I made a decision that surprised even Emma. Instead of celebrating Sophia's downfall or piling on to her public humiliation, I posted something that would become the defining moment of our entire conflict. "Accountability and cruelty are not the same thing," I wrote alongside a photo of Sophia as a child, helping me arrange flowers in the shop. "My daughter made choices that hurt our family and exploited our relationship for personal gain. She's facing the natural consequences of those choices now. But watching someone you love suffer, even when they've caused their own suffering, is still painful. I hope she finds the wisdom to rebuild her life on a foundation of honesty rather than manipulation." The response to that post revealed something profound about human nature and family dynamics. While many people expected me to gloat over Sophia's downfall, my refusal to do so actually strengthened my credibility and moral authority in ways that continued attacks never could have. Comments flooded in praising my grace and maturity. People who had initially been neutral in our conflict began expressing clear support for my position, recognizing that someone who could show compassion for the person who had betrayed them possessed a strength of character that couldn't be faked. But the most important response came from an unexpected source. 3 days after my compassionate post, I received a text message from Sophia that consisted of just 2 words: "I'm sorry." The message came not through social media or email, but as a private text to my personal phone number. It was the first direct communication we'd had since our final conversation about mortgage payments, and its simplicity carried more weight than any of her elaborate public statements. I stared at those 2 words for a long time before responding. "I know you are," I wrote back. "The question is whether you're sorry for getting caught or sorry for what you did." Her response came quickly. "Both, honestly. But mostly I'm sorry for hurting you. I lost sight of who you really are and who I wanted to be." That exchange opened a door that had been closed for months. Over the following weeks, Sophia and I began having conversations that were more honest than any we'd shared since her childhood. Without the pressure of her online persona and the financial safety net of my support, she was forced to confront the reality of what she'd become and the cost of her choices. I started making content about our relationship because it got good engagement, she admitted during one of our phone calls. But then the engagement became validation, and the validation became income, and suddenly I was trapped in this story where you had to be the problem for me to be the solution. The insight revealed how social media algorithms and financial incentives had corrupted her perception of our relationship. What had started as innocent venting about family dynamics had evolved into a business model that required escalating conflict and victimization to maintain profitability. I convinced myself that you really were too involved in my life, she continued, because believing that made it easier to justify what I was doing. It's hard to make money by calling your mom a burden if you admit she's actually been your biggest supporter. Those conversations were painful but necessary. We dissected years of interactions that I thought were loving but she'd experienced as performance obligations for her content creation. We talked about the ways social media had distorted her perception of normal family relationships, making healthy interdependence look like dysfunction when viewed through the lens of individualistic self-help culture. The financial reality was sobering. Sophia had lost her house, her social media income, and most of her professional credibility. She'd moved into a small apartment that consumed most of her salary from her day job, leaving her with barely enough money for basic expenses. The lifestyle she'd maintained while calling me a burden was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of true financial independence. But something remarkable happened during those months of genuine struggle. Without the pressure of maintaining her online image or the safety net of my financial support, Sophia began to rediscover the person she'd been before social media fame corrupted her values. She started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding fulfillment in work that didn't require documenting her virtue for public consumption. She also began therapy with a different counselor, one who helped her understand how she'd weaponized therapeutic language to justify manipulative behavior. The boundary setting and self-care concepts that had been used to frame her exploitation of our relationship were revealed as distortions of genuinely helpful psychological tools. I thought independence meant rejecting help and connection, she told me during one of our rebuilding conversations. But real independence means being able to maintain relationships without exploitation or manipulation. It means being grateful for support instead of resentful about obligations. The process of rebuilding our relationship was slow and sometimes frustrating. Years of manipulation and hurt couldn't be erased with apologies and good intentions. Trust had to be earned back through consistent actions rather than convincing words. But there were signs of genuine change. Sophia stopped asking for financial help entirely, even when I could see she was struggling. She began showing interest in my life and business that seemed authentic rather than performative. Most importantly, she took concrete steps to make amends for the damage she'd caused. One of those steps was posting a public apology that shocked her remaining social media followers. Unlike her previous content, this post was unpolished and vulnerable, acknowledging the specific ways she'd misrepresented our relationship and the harm she'd caused through her pursuit of online fame. I built my platform by turning my mother into a villain, she wrote. I took someone who sacrificed everything for my success and painted her as a burden, because that story got likes and followers and money. I was wrong, and I hurt someone who deserved better from me. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just understanding that sometimes people we love make choices that damage the relationships they value most. The post marked the end of Sophia's influencer career, but the beginning of her journey back to authentic relationships. She disabled her social media accounts entirely, choosing to focus on rebuilding her life away from the platforms that had corrupted her perspective on family and success. 6 months after the foreclosure notice was delivered, Sophia and I met for coffee at a small cafe near my flower shop. She looked different, tired from working longer hours at a job that actually covered her expenses, but also more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. The constant performance pressure of maintaining her online image was gone, replaced by the simple satisfaction of living within her means. I keep thinking about all the money you gave me, she said, stirring her coffee nervously. Not just the mortgage payments, but everything over the years. College, the house down payment, all those emergencies that weren't really emergencies. I want to pay you back. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised who was finally becoming the person I'd hoped she'd be, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine pride in her character rather than just her accomplishments. You don't owe me money, I said. You owe me honesty, respect, and the kind of relationship where we both tell the truth about our feelings instead of performing them for an audience. Can you give me that? She nodded, tears filling her eyes. I want to try. I want to be the daughter you deserve, instead of the influencer I thought I needed to be. That conversation marked the real beginning of our healing. Over the following months, we slowly rebuilt a relationship based on mutual respect, rather than financial dependence or social media performance. Sophia found satisfaction in her ordinary job and simple apartment, discovering that contentment didn't require constant documentation or validation from strangers. I continued running my flower shop and building my own social media presence, but with a different focus. Instead of responding to conflict or proving points about family dysfunction, I used my platform to showcase the beauty of small business ownership and the satisfaction of creating something meaningful with your own hands. The contrast between my content and Sophia's former posts highlighted the difference between authentic sharing and manipulative performance. People followed my accounts because they found inspiration in genuine achievement rather than manufactured drama. The relationship between Sophia and me became something neither of us had experienced before. A true partnership between adult women who respected each other's boundaries while maintaining emotional connection. We talked regularly, but without the desperate neediness she'd once characterized, or the resentful obligation she'd felt. We helped each other when needed, but without the exploitation or manipulation that had poisoned our previous dynamic. A year after the foreclosure notice was delivered, Sophia got a promotion at her marketing job and moved into a better apartment that she could afford without assistance. She called me to share the news, but not because she needed my validation or wanted my advice. She called because she wanted to celebrate her success with someone who would be genuinely happy for her achievement. I did this completely on my own, she told me, and her voice carried a pride I hadn't heard since she was a child learning to ride a bicycle. No family money, no social media income, no shortcuts, just work and patience and living within my means. Listening to her excitement about genuine independence, I realized that my refusal to continue enabling her had given her something more valuable than any amount of money could have provided. It had given her the opportunity to discover her own strength and the satisfaction of building a life she could be proud of without qualification or asterisks. The woman who had once called me a burden while depending on my support had become someone who could stand on her own feet and choose to maintain our relationship because she wanted to, not because she needed to. The transformation was more complete and meaningful than any viral social media moment could ever be. Looking back on the entire experience, I understood that Sophia's betrayal had ultimately been a gift, though not one I would have chosen. It forced me to rediscover my own worth, independent of my role as her financial safety net. It taught me the difference between love and enabling, between support and exploitation. Most importantly, it showed me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to participate in their self-destruction, even when that refusal causes temporary pain for both of you. The mother who had spent years trying to make her daughter's life easier had finally learned that easy lives don't create strong people. Today I run my flower shop with the satisfaction of someone who built something beautiful through decades of patient work. Sophia lives her life with the pride of someone who overcame her own worst instincts to become the person she was meant to be. We're both stronger for having survived the destruction of our old relationship and the careful construction of a new one. The burden my daughter thought she was carrying turned out to be the very foundation that held her life together. When she finally learned to carry her own weight, she discovered she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. And the mother she'd once seen as an obstacle became her greatest supporter in building the authentic, honest life she'd almost traded away for social media fame. Sometimes the hardest lesson love can teach is that real support means knowing when to step back and let someone face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes being a good parent means refusing to be a convenient solution to problems your children need to solve themselves. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the chance to discover who they really are when the safety net is gone. The foreclosure notice I posted wasn't just about public vindication or social media justice. It was about showing my daughter, and everyone watching our story unfold, that actions have consequences, and that genuine independence requires taking responsibility for your choices, rather than blaming the people who've supported you along the way. The woman who had once been called a burden proved she was actually the backbone. The daughter who had claimed independence while demanding support learned what real independence actually required. And both of us discovered that authentic relationships, built on honesty and mutual respect, are worth more than any amount of social media fame or financial convenience. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.